Good afternoon, Michael Lambreaux from Pascoag, Rhode Island. So thank you for the opportunity to come and address the board today. I've been, I guess, recently become familiar with the EFSB, becoming active with the power plant in Burrillville. But as I've gone through and reviewed the current procedure and tried to prepare for today, I tried to, my best, take an objective approach, because there are some things that the EFSB needs to be prepared for that aren't quite as big as a power plant. So I have some thoughts here that I thought might be good bullet points for you to potentially consider. And some of these are things that I found from reviewing the procedure, and others are just kind of lessons learned from experiencing it from a member of the community. So the first one is around application requirements. So one of the things that seems a little ambiguous in the procedure today is what actually classifies a complete set of plans. So this has been something that has been a pretty heavy debate. And when you go through and review the procedure, there isn't any clear requirements that I could find to really let you know what you should expect. And where I find that this becomes challenging is, I understand for a facility as big as a power plant, it's extremely expensive to put together very detailed plans. However, when you're dealing with a small town's planning board and zoning board that needs to review these documents to try to put together an opinion, they're used to getting detailed plans because they're used to dealing with sheds and houses and things like that. So there's got to be some type of middle ground that we can come to that allows the people that are in this position to be able to give a good advisory opinion and come to a conclusion about things without getting into the financial burden. The next topic is around cost. So this was an eye-opening thing that I've come to see. So my understanding is that the host community gets $100,000 that they're able to use to spend on consultants and experts to try to help them with understanding any type of environmental impact, what impact to their town, and things like that. The applicant has an unlimited amount of funds. Now, I realize they're a company, right? So they can invest as much as they want to, but it's a really unfair advantage that any applicant has coming to the state, where they can basically, kind of finance their way through, knowing that these small communities can't afford to combat that. So somehow we've got to put something in place to kind of even the playing ground a little bit. And I've been trying to brainstorm this a bunch to try to figure out what the best way to do this. I don't know if there's a tiering model where, if the applicant is spending this much on their experts, then they need to allow the host community the same right. I don't know, but there's got to be a way to kind of balance that off a little bit. The next one is around dependent projects. So my understanding is that there is actually some case law for insubmissible segmentation that's supposed to ensure that related projects and dependent projects are viewed together, but we're not seeing that in this particular example. So my thought is that somehow there's got to be something written into this procedure to make sure that the board isn't accepting other applications that may be related to the existing application. There's probably got to be some time criteria around there. So to give the real example, I guess, for the Burrillville power plant, you also have the interconnection application that's pending. Well, if you were able to update the procedure in such a way to connect those, they couldn't be submitted separately. They'd have to come together. Then you'd have to take a wider look at the environmental impact and the costs and so on. The next one is around public awareness in meetings. So one of my suggestions is that these type of applications should be promoted statewide. So today, what we see with the Clear River Energy Center, there'll be an advertisement in our Bargain Buyer, which is our local paper, to let people know here's when the EFSB meeting is. You can come. Hopefully, the timing and the location is correct. But these are state projects. There's a lot of argument around saying that it impacts Burrillville, but this is a state project, and it should be advertised as such. So what my recommendation is that there should be the applicant should fund the advertising, and they should fund the EFSB to send out the communication. So anyone across the state has the same, communication around when these meetings are if they want to attend. Advisory opinions. One thought around here, so I saw a couple things that was interesting. So there's a couple examples where some advisory opinions were asked and they were never submitted. So I think we've got to strengthen that so that it's a requirement. They can't proceed without the actual advisory opinions. And what I'd like to see is there's a lot of state-level documents that are in place around our land use for 2035, our water plan, the town comprehensive plans. All these advisory opinions should relate back to these documents. And if it's going to impact any of those plans, it should speak to how it may change those documents. The next topic I had, and I'll try to hurry up here, is around the...
Take your time, Michael.
Thank you. Around the board members. So I'm not sure, I'm sure you've all started looking to see how other states in New England do this. I found a paper that I can maybe, perhaps if you don't have it, Representative Keeble, I'll send it to you. New Hampshire had a study done, I think 4 years ago, and they've done a good job of analyzing every state in New England. So they have some really good charts kind of explaining how every single state does it. But by far, Rhode Island, Vermont are the only states that have 3 members. Everyone else has anywhere from 7 to 15. And I would strongly encourage you, if you haven't already, to take a look at how New Hampshire has set up their board. I worry that there's a little maybe too many members because there's 15 there, but they have a good representation of a lot of different areas there. The other thing I think is important, and I think Steve might have mentioned this, or maybe Lorraine, it's not uncommon to have the majority of your board members appointed by the governor. So for the sake of transparency, I think one of the lessons learned going through this process is that people worry that it's not a fair process and that there's a lack of transparency and all this other stuff. So if we can ensure that the majority of the board members aren't appointed by the governor or some higher authority that they have to, maybe even if it's just the impression that there could be something wrong going on there, that'd probably be a good thing. Another interesting thing that I found is on New Hampshire Board, they actually have a member whose purpose is to represent the public, which I found to be very interesting. So there's been comments already around the experience to go to public comment and worrying about whether your voice is heard. Well, in their model, you actually have a seat at the table to represent you. And then a couple of final thoughts. It looks like a couple other states are already starting to adjust their procedures to accommodate some of the renewables. So there's some states are doing some studies on how to handle wind and solar. So we should probably take the opportunity to add that type of thing in. One note, so I've been fairly active in the public comment process. And one thing that I do find interesting, and we've had the luxury of having a lot of public comments with this particular application. But if that wasn't the case, our ability to speak intelligently to key points would be non-existent. And even so, I feel like when you go to public comment, you're always one step behind. So you never have I feel like you never have the latest and greatest information to try to intelligently speak to that. You always have to try to prepare and do some research, which you should anyways, but you're trying to jump ahead. So if there's a way to balance it, so it's good to have the public comment at the beginning, but you need to make sure you have all the good information so you can really speak to things. And then my last thought is that we should build something in here to have an ongoing review of the procedure. So I think it's 30 or so years old at this point. It'd be good if we have some type of routine checkpoint to make sure that it's currently being reviewed and staying up to date as things change. So with that, I think those are all my items to speak to. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Lambreaux? Mr. Rosselli?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mike, for all your work and certainly your testimony today. This is not only a question to you, but maybe a question to the other members here. Given this, what you mentioned as insubmissible segmentation, I'm wondering, does the current authority with the EFSB, does the current authority give the SB any room for combining dockets? Like, could they still combine the power plant construction, permitting, siting with the transmission line interconnection? Does anybody know that?
Well, I don't want to put Todd on
I don't wanna put
the
anybody
on the spot, particularly for
But
a
Mike-
particularly for applications that are currently pending.
Yeah, sure.
And frankly are a little contested.
Yeah.
But
But I would ask that we could.
but maybe he
find
could
out.
answer a hypothetical question as to whether or not there is a procedure in the current act that allows for dockets to be combined, and if there is any in the current act criteria for that. If you're comfortable answering that question, Mr. Bianco.
Thank you. I'm comfortable saying that I think there is in the Act, and if not in the Act, certainly in the rules, some language regarding associated and support facilities. And so for the last 30 years, that's been part of the board's decision and applications as to what constitutes support facilities. And then there's also the question of who the appropriate applicants are. So certain parts of facilities have different owners, and that can be the reason alone why they might be considered separately or together. That's also historically speaking.
But I think Mr. Lambreaux's point is maybe it's not a bad idea to empower the siting board if they see fit to combine them. Any further questions from Mike?